Should the New York Mets be looking to extend Pete Alonso this offseason, and what would that contract look like? Going to discuss all of that on today's episode of Locked On Mets.
You are Locked On Mets, your daily New York Mets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello to all you amazing Mets fans who are listening to Locked On Mets, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Locked On Mets is free and available on all platforms, including YouTube. Now, on today's show, I will talk about what a Pete Alonso contract extension could look like for the New York Mets. In the first segment, I want to compare Pete Alonso to Freddie Freeman, because Freeman got an extension after his first 3 big league seasons. So a similar career arc to Pete Alonso. I'll go through what his contract was and how that could compare to what Pete could make. Then in the second segment, I want to compare Pete Alonso to Joey Votto, who got a contract extension at a similar age as Pete Alonso. And then in the last segment, I'll come up with the extension I think makes the most sense for the New York Mets and Pete Alonso. Before we get to any of that, though, I'm your host, Ryan Finkelstein. If you want to find any of my work, follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. You can also find some of my writing about the Mets at justbaseball.com. So Freddie Freeman debuted for the Atlanta Braves at 20 years old back in 2010, but became their full-time starting first baseman in 2011. The first 3 years of his career are somewhat similar to Pete Alonso's. Alonso's numbers may be a little bit better, but let's just dive into those numbers really quick here. So across the first 3 seasons of Freddie Freeman's career, he hit 287, a 361 on base percentage, a 468 slugging percentage, 67 home runs, 279 RBIs. Pete Alonso hit 256, 347 on base, so not quite the same on base threat as Freddie Freeman, but a 542 slugging percentage and 106 home runs, which means he hit 29 home runs more than Freddie Freeman. And here's the crazy part. He played way less games because of the COVID-shortened year. Pete Alonso did all of that damage in 370 games. Freddie Freeman, you're talking about 451 games. You go to WRC Plus, which measures hitters based on a league average of 100, where Freddie Freeman, his WRC Plus through 3 years was 128. Pete Alonso, 136. So Pete's been a slightly better player. If you look at the awards, the accolades, the Rookie of the Year for Pete, the home run record, the marketability, these aren't the same players. They're also in different markets, different ownership. I mean, Pete might push for more money than Freddie Freeman got at this stage of his career. And also, the timelines are different because of the age that they debuted. When Freddie Freeman signed his contract, which was an 8-year, $135 million deal, he was entering his age 24 season. Pete Alonso debuted at 24. So there is a big difference there where Freddie Freeman could take an 8-year deal at that stage of his career and still hit free agency entering his age 32 season, which he's doing right now. He's a free agent coming off a World Series championship, and he's about to cash in on one huge contract, which should dwarf that $135 million extension he signed at the time. But for Freeman, he got to play out a lot of his prime with the franchise that developed and drafted him, the whole deal. Pete Alonso, that is very attractive, I'm sure, but an 8-year contract would put Alonso in a position where he's not hitting free agency until after his age 34 season. So it's tough to get a big bite of free agency like Freeman's about to enjoy when you're entering your age 35 year. That's really rough. So the thing with comparing these two players is for Pete, he'd probably be looking more for a 5-year extension to line up with Freddie Freeman's free agency, as in he would want to hit free agency after his age 31 season. So a 5-year deal would accomplish that. For the Mets, you'd be buying out 2 of his free agent years, but at the same time, you also could just let this play out, let him play out his arbitration years. And then as he's entering his age 30 season, then you can negotiate and try to sign Pete Alonso to a contract. The problem is that Pete Alonso could completely dominate the next 3 years, and suddenly when he's entering that age 30 season on the open market, now you're talking about a deal that is really difficult to come to terms with, a contract that's going to cost way more money than if you had just signed Pete Alonso right now. And that is where you get into the question. If you're going to extend Pete Alonso, and it's going to be a deal that keeps him in a Mets uniform for the rest of his career, what would that look like? Because honestly, based on his age, this might be the time to get your money right now. This might be the time to sign a 10-year deal, similar to what Joey Votto signed with the Reds, because this is an age and time for the player where he would like to get his money. And the Mets could lock him into a number now that's much cheaper than if they waited 3 years and try to sign him as he was entering free agency. I'm going to discuss what Votto got and what that could mean for Pete Alonso in just a minute. This holiday season, grab that protein bar that tastes like a candy bar or even better than a candy bar, and that is Built Bar, which is filled with so much holiday goodness, rich with decadent flavor, covered in chocolate, but amazingly low in calories, sugar, net carbs, and fat while being high in protein. So you get the best of both worlds, delicious and healthy. There's so many delicious flavors to choose from, whether it's the raspberry, mint brownie, cherry, double chocolate, or my personal favorite, cookies and cream. Built Bar is there for you. You can get a mixed box where you can try all the different flavors, see which ones you like best. And Built Bar will give you that extra fuel you need, whether you are battling the holiday shoppers and busting down those mall doors, or whether you are just trying to get ready for a nice workout to keep off some of that holiday weight that you might pack on with all the other delicious treats that are on your table this time of year. If you want to try Built Bar today, go to built.com and you can use the promo code LOCK15 to get 15% off your next order. Again, that's promo code LOCK15 for 15% off at built.com. All right, so now let's talk about Joey Votto and the contract extension he's still playing out with the Cincinnati Reds. If you go back to 2011, this is after his third big league season, the same time frame we're talking about with Freddie, Freeman, and Pete Alonso. Joey Votto had won an MVP that year in 2011, the first of 4 consecutive seasons where he led the league in on-base percentage. I believe it was 7 out of 9 years where he did that. He also led the league in slugging percentage that year. He had 37 home runs, 36 doubles, and 2 triples for a total of 75 extra base hits. He was entering his age 27 season, and at the time, Votto signed a 3-year, $38 million contract extension, which essentially bought out his arbitration years. Goes out the next year, once again as an all-star, once again leads the league in on-base percentage, finished 6th in MVP voting. The Reds decide, let's keep Votto. He's great. He's going to still be great for this contract. Let's just lock him up and make him a Red for the rest of his career. So he signed a 10-year, $225 million deal. Now, that included the 2 years that were left on his previous extension. A very important note, I should add, because that really does lower the average annual value. Altogether, $251.5 million over 12 years comes out to right about $21 million a year when it comes to the average annual value. Now, that right there is why you would want to extend Pete Alonso right now, because when he hits free agency in 3 years, suddenly that number could be $35-40 million a year. Whereas right now, maybe you can lock Pete into a deal that is closer to that $20 million range. And then over a decade, which would be a little bit concerning because you already have Francisco Lindor under a contract that long. But when you look at what Pete Alonso could do and what he could put up the next couple of years when it comes to numbers, right? Let's just say Alonso, were to hit 40 home runs a season. Then you're looking at a player that's got 225 plus career home runs hitting free agency going into his age 30 season. How much money is in the command then? So now suddenly for those years in his late 30s, you're talking about, again, paying closer to $35-40 million instead of $20 million if you lock him in right now where he's still under team control, where you still have 3 years of arbitration, where he's going to be underpaid. This is the time to negotiate. And when you look at the two players, right, Freeman and Votto, obviously they are different because of the ages of their careers, and neither of them matches up entirely with Pete. But if you look at the fact that Pete Alonso is not quite as accomplished as Joey Votto was at the time when he signed his extension, but a similar age, then he's also a little bit more accomplished than Freddie Freeman, but more on line with that. But Freeman is way younger. If you look at the two contracts, the 8 for 135 the 10 for 225. Somewhere in the middle there is a deal that makes sense for Pete Alonso to sign this coming off, or not this coming off season, this off season, once we get on the other side of the lockout. The question is, what is that number? And would Pete Alonso sign on the dotted line and forgo his chance to enter free agency, maybe ever in his career? BetOnline has you covered all season with more props, odds, and lines than ever before as the football season continues to march towards the playoffs. BetOnline remains your number one spot for all the sports action this season. Head to the new updated desktop or mobile website to sign up today and receive your 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit just by using the promo code Locked On. From basketball, football, NHL, boxing, and UFC, right to your favorite Vegas casino games, don't wait to take advantage of all the amazing offers available for the 2021 season. BetOnline is the fastest and easiest way to bet on your favorite sports. Bet online, where the game starts. All right, folks, let's get into the numbers here. How much money could Pete Alonso command on a contract extension this offseason, or what should the Mets be approaching Alonso with this offseason? Here's the number I came up with, and you might say it's low, but hear me out. A 10-year, $180 million deal. Now, again, your first reaction is 18 a year for Pete. This is going to be a contract that's structured for Pete Alonso. So we're going to get into an incentive structure in a minute. But the reason why I start there is because you cannot underestimate the value of $180 million. Everyone always focuses on what a player's max earning potential is. Wander Franco just signs that 11-year was $182 million deal. And everyone's freaking out because, hey, if he hit free agency, who knows? He could have got a $300 million contract, a $400 million contract, a $500 million contract. He should have played it out. But you're asking a player to go through years where you're uncertain if you're ever going to reach that payday. It's hard to get to free agency. And so if you're Wander Franco and you're talking about getting $182 million guaranteed before you even play your 71st major league game, that's something that interests you. If you're Pete Alonso, who is clearly a Mets guy, a franchise type player who loves this organization, has had this love story with the city, the fans, all of that. This is an opportunity to play your entire career with the team that drafted you, to have that security of a decade-long contract, and to have $180 million guaranteed in your bank account immediately. If you get hurt tomorrow, you have that money secured. That is important to talk about, and that is why the Mets have a position of leverage to negotiate right now. If Pete Alonso wants to hit free agency, he's not going to consider that deal. He's only going to talk maybe a 5-year extension, or he's just going to say, look, I'm going to make some pretty decent money through arbitration this year. I think he's projected to make about 7. So then you factor in, a nice bump the next couple of years. He's not going to do great, but he's not going to do terribly well. He's still going to probably make, I would figure, if he gets a bump to 12, 14, I mean, you'd imagine he could still bring home at least $40 million the next 3 years, if not closer to 50. But if you're Pete Alonso, maybe you want to play this out. Maybe you want to hit 40 home runs a year. And like I said before, hit free agency with 225 career home runs as a free agent at going into your age 30 season, who's proven that you're a 40 home run guy and you can get $37 million a year on a 7-year deal. Who knows? Maybe that happens. But right now, that's a lot of uncertainty for Pete Alonso to go into the next 3 years of his career with, where he could lock up a contract right now. Now, here's where you incentivize a contract that would allow Pete Alonso to take this deal. Very similar to the creative structure we saw with the Minnesota Twins and Byron Buxton that I talked about on the Brandon Nimmo extension podcast, where he got all of these bonuses for finishing in the top 10 of MVP voting. For Pete Alonso, what does the man do? He mashes baseballs and hits home runs. So what should you incentivize? Home runs. If you were to put up an incentive structure that is based on home runs, where he's getting bonuses from 40 home runs on, 40 home run season, 45 home run, 50 home run, 55, 60. I mean, just give him crazy bonuses for every milestone he hits on the home run scale. That's a way that he can maximize his earning potential, but have a base contract that, lets him have that peace of mind. And for the Mets, a base contract at whatever that is, $18 million a year, where You love that deal long term for the Mets. If he's hurt for a year, that contract is an albatross. You can build around him. And when he's great, if he's winning an MVP, if he's winning a Silver Slugger, if he wins that Gold Glove he wants so much, you incentivize all of that stuff. Incentivize all-star appearances. Give him incentives. So yeah, on the season where he's great, that $18 million base salary maybe has the potential to earn over 25 because he hit all of his incentives. But this is a way the Mets right now can lock themselves into a player at a contract more along their terms instead of waiting and allowing Pete Alonso to continue to perform and then price himself, maybe not necessarily out of the Mets price range anymore because they have Steve Cohen, but certainly cost way more money than if you just talked extension right now. What smart teams do is they take their players when they know that they have a prospect that's a success, that's going to be an above average to potential star level player at the big league level. They lock them up. That's what they do. That's what the Braves did with Freddie Freeman. Clearly, that paid off in a big way, especially now that they won the World Series. And with the Reds, that's what they did with Votto. And even though the Reds haven't had the team success you would want, that's not because of Joey Votto. And Joey Votto has been a star player in a small market, who has really helped carry the fan base through. So these players are important to lock up. And for Pete Alonso, he is one of the most significant players on the New York Mets. If you were to sign him to a 10-year contract right now, that's going to take him through his age 36 season. And maybe if you really wanted to, if Pete really wanted to have that chance to hit free agency, you give him an opt-out after the 8th year. And if you're the Mets, all right, well, you get out of the last 2 years of whatever that contract is. That's fine by you. And he gets to hit free agency after his age 34 season if he wanted to. Or if Pete really wants a taste of free agency and he wants maybe a structure similar to what Freddie Freeman got, you can talk about a similar structure I just laid out, but over a 5-year deal. I mean, 5 for 90 with some incentives in there that he could hit to make some more money during that span. That's a contract that still makes sense for both sides. You would get Pete Alonso for the next 5 years. You would have him through his age 31 season. And then at that point, you'd have to get to the same situation that the Braves are in right now, where you have to decide whether you give him that next contract. It'll be interesting to see what the Braves do with Freddie Freeman. Technically, if you were to just look at it in a vacuum and be really unsentimental about it, maybe the Braves would be wise to let Freddie Freeman walk, because who knows? Maybe they just got the value years of his career and he's going to fall off a cliff. I don't think so with Freddie Freeman. And I also think, in comparison, Pete Alonso is a player that I don't see falling off a cliff anytime soon either. But these are the decisions you have to make. The bottom line, though, is this is the time to extend a player like Pete Alonso so you can lock him into a number through his arbitration, through at least a couple years of free agency, if not the long-term deal, where he is at a number that is not astronomical based on the production he's going to continue to put up. Because in that Mets lineup this season, I've already said that Pete Alonso should lead the National League in RBIs 100% this year. With all the on-base guys he has in front of him, with Starling Marte, Francisco Lindor, Brandon Nimmo, Mark Canha, all these different guys that get on base a ton, Pete Alonso should have a lot of ducks in the pond. So when he hits those home runs, they cash in as 3 RBIs instead of 1. And if that happens, you're going to be talking about a season by the end of the year where he could pad his numbers to the point that that contract is just going to continue to climb. And next off season, we could be having an entirely different conversation where 10 years, $180 million seems just patently absurd. Maybe it does already. Let me know in the comments if you think that contract is way too little for Pete Alonso. But anyway, that's going to be all for today's edition of Locked On Mets. As always, thank you for listening. Make sure you follow, rate, and review wherever you get your podcast. Make sure you follow me on Twitter at Finkelstein Ryan. Follow the show at Locked On Mets. Thank you for making Locked On Mets your first listen every day. Now for your second listen, check out Locked On Bets, hosted by your boy Q and handicapping expert Lee Sterling. Get daily picks, blowout specials, wrong team favorite picks, and Lee Sterling's lock of the day by following Locked On Bets wherever you get podcasts.